you've raised the question of equity, and we've actually got a ton of questions on equity tonight from various students in our audience. We're going to meet a couple of them just now. Ruby, you're in Year 7, I think, at Randwick Girls High. You're very small sitting down, so do you want to stand up? Yeah. That'll make this easier. You've seen your own school, but you've also seen other schools, some private schools. How do they compare?
Well, my school, it's amazing, but there's like a lot of cosmetic issues. The whole school is made of concrete and it's just bare exposed concrete. There's a lot of the classrooms are ill-equipped for modern learning and barely any of them have aircon. But I went to Skeggs and... Sorry, I wasn't meant to say Skeggs, but anyway.
Another school. This is a private school. You went to have a look there. How did it compare?
It was incredible. Like, the grounds were huge and it was so beautiful and everything was shiny. They even had like a life-size skeleton with like organs and everything. And I just couldn't understand why schools like that are getting funding over schools like mine.
Okay. And you... Before I leave you, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be the Prime Minister of Australia.
Okay, there we go. Emily, would you like to stand up as well? You've moved to Sydney from Griffith in regional New South Wales. Compare the schooling experience there with the Big Smoke.
What stands out in particular about the comparison in private school schooling here and public school schooling in rural New South Wales is that there is a clear disparity between the resources, the facilities and the outside of school educational opportunities. So for myself, I was unable to access debating competitions because of the area I lived in and because of my location. And so for me, that raised the question of not why did I want to go to a private school, but rather how can I further my educational opportunities? And it's things like being here tonight and being able to be part of the discussion and debate, which prove that rural students are not able to access these things, and despite what's being done in terms of Gonski and Aurora College, which I know was Adrian's initiative, there's still no other rural students here, and I would like to see in the future so many more who are able to attend and able to have these educational opportunities.
Okay. Elise, you're going to jump up. Obviously, a huge number of questions on this tonight. You're the school captain at Cheltenham.
That's correct.
Eloise, what's your question?
So I go to a public school and I see many non-government schools that have Olympic-sized indoor swimming pools and world-class theatres and baronial-style libraries. And I see that they don't need public funding, but I still see them getting a lot of resources and funding from the government. And at the same time, I see schools and public schools like my own that are sometimes not able to give basic learning resources like textbooks because we simply do not have enough. How is this fair? And why are we funding privilege, not educational outcomes?
Okay. Adrian, quickly, I'm going to put this to you. Is this what the Gonski reforms were all about?
Well, the Gonski reforms were actually about needs-based funding. So, schools resourcing standard, it's quite technical, but every student gets funded based on need. And then if you had a particular characteristic, a particular disadvantaged characteristic, that there would be extra funding, and then that funding would go whichever school you went to. So, needs-based funding delivers funding to students who need it. Now, there are existing disparities around this school resourcing standard, who's above it, who's below it, and there are all these transition periods. So, it's complicated. So the system it's gotten better.
Before you go on, though...
It's not fixed.
Because the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority says actually that over the past decade, public funding to private schools has risen nearly twice as fast as public funding to public schools. Mm-hmm. That's not quite what you're saying.
Well, I mean, I'm not here to defend the Commonwealth Government, either the current one or the previous one. Right? That's not my job here. The New South Wales Government that I was a part of, we certainly did increase the amount of money that we spent on public schools. And the reason we signed up to Gonski particularly is because when I saw the numbers as Minister about which schools would benefit the most, the ones who benefited the most were country schools, regional and remote schools, huge beneficiaries.
Small
the
schools.
Second biggest beneficiaries were Western and Southwestern Sydney, And the ones who benefited the least were the ones you would expect to benefit the least. That's why we signed up for it. That's why we took the measures we took to make sure that we could invest in it. And I think look, funding is not fixed by any stretch of the imagination, but it is much better than it was 10 years ago. And I've got to say, Simon Birmingham and Malcolm Turnbull fixed it again a little bit by reducing some of the overfunded non-government schools.
2.0, is that what?
Yeah, they reduced the funding that was going, the overfunding that was going to some non-government schools. So, you know, I've got to give them credit as well. It's far from fixed, but it is an improvement on what it was.
Can I just
I
jump in
think
here?
Eddie Wu wanted to jump in here.
It's just about the formula, though. Can I just add something to the formula
Sure.
super quickly? So Adrian's described the schooling resource standard, blah, blah, blah. Let's just call that a school's fair funding level, OK? What the Commonwealth Government has now done is said that every non-government school by 2023 will get to 100% or more of their fair funding level, but public schools will only ever get to 95% of their fair funding level. That's in the formula. That's baked in. That inequality is now baked in based on the arrangements that the Commonwealth Government's made with the states and territories. That's at the heart of the unfairness.
So to be specific, how would you fix it? How would you change it?
Well, all schools should get to 100% of their fair funding level
So
over
how
time.
where would you find the money from?
Well, you have to do these things over time. You have to, at the moment, by 2023, every non-government school will be at 100% or more, and no public school will ever get there. No, sorry, 99% of public schools will never get there under this funding model.
Would you then change the process through which independent schools are adjusted?
Well, I'm not going to make up a funding model on TV on your show tonight.
Sure, but you'd be familiar with the arguments about doing it based on postcodes versus the actual income of the parents.
That actually is irrelevant to this. I think that's a fairer measure. Taking a parent's actual income is a fairer measure, but that's not the question here. The question is, do we get all schools to their fair funding level, or is it okay that public schools never get there under this model?
So I can't give you a free pass on this. Will you have a policy for fixing that by the next election?
Well, we've got 2 years till the next election, and our last education policy had $14 billion extra for public schools.